Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast, and I am joined by I'm proud to say, I hope she agrees, a friend of mine.
I agree,
Um,
Chris.
friends now. Tracy Goodyear, who I've joked about offline about being one of the key reasons why any of this stuff exists. And we'll get into our friendship a bit later. But yeah, an absolute joy to have her here. So let's get started with the slides. I'll take that down and let's get cracking. So Tracy, tell us a bit about this Director of Teacher Development role you got. Where is it and what do you do?
Okay, yeah, great question, Chris. So I'm the Director of Teacher Development for a trust called the Mercian Trust, which is a soon-to-be 12 school trust. I think we've got 10 schools at the moment in Sandwell and Walsall in the West Midlands. So right in the heart of the Black Country, not too far from Peaky Blinders territory. And my role in that organisation is to curate and design professional development across the organisation. So it is mainly teachers, but also spans supporting support staff and also leadership development as well.
Nice.
Yeah,
And
it is
of
nice.
course, you didn't do that all the time. So, what did you do before and why did you make the jump into that?
Yeah, okay. So before that, I was a senior leader in a selective grammar school. Prior to that was a head of English in that same school. And then prior to that, head of English, English teacher, form tutor, pastoral, the whole range of things in a mixed comprehensive in Dudley in the West Midlands. You asked me why I moved.
Yeah.
So I when I became head of department, I think would probably be the kind of inflection point or the turning point for me. Became really interested in professional development and how it
Okay.
was and is such a tool and a lever for school improvement and for personal improvement for colleagues as well. So, and much of that has been based on my own experience, having been on the receiving end, as I'm sure you have, of exceptional leadership and also some pretty shoddy, not so good leadership as well. And so I kind of see it as my aim to make sure that we get ourselves into a position where the only option for our colleagues is to be successful and to feel success in their roles. So that's the reason for the jump, really. This job came up at Mercy and I saw it accidentally and I thought this. And I spoke to a couple of people and they'd sort of said if there was a job that had been designed with you in mind, that it would be this sort of job. So, so incredibly proud to do it and incredibly proud to work for the trust.
Amazing.
Yeah, so
There's already, you won't have known this, but you've already dropped a massive soundbite. That idea that staff have no option but to be successful. How cool is
yeah,
that you create a system where you can't avoid being successful?
yeah. And
That's a
again, I think I was on the receiving end of that sort of treatment from a deputy head who I worked closely with in my NQT year. I'm sure I'll
okay.
probably talk about this a little bit later. I might be going all over the place.
Yeah,
But
that's all right.
I'd had a really awful training year and wasn't a very good teacher at all. Knew I wanted to be a teacher and was very, very proud to be in the classroom. However, there's a combination of different reasons why I didn't succeed in that first year. I was doing a GTP. The school knew me really well because I'd done a lot of unqualified supply teaching. And as a result of that, I didn't really want to challenge what people's perception of me was as a
Yeah.
teacher. They thought I was competent. And as a result, I had a full teaching timetable in the first week of my GTP year, and then it carried on from there. So it was
Yeah.
a combination of a couple of things, which was, well, that taught me really never to assume and to check carefully, excuse me, before making assumptions about ability.
God, yeah. Yeah, that's
Sorry,
super,
Chris.
super important, isn't
Yeah.
it?
So I'm so
Well,
sorry.
I'll carry on. Well, there might be some people out there that, naturally, I guess they've got aspirations to take on a role like yours. So, like, give me a potted. What does a typical week look like?
Oh, but it's never the same, which is
Yeah.
the joy of it. I suppose that's one of the reasons why we love working in schools, isn't it? But yes, it can be all sorts, from looking at effective partners for the organisation, how we operate as an organisation, looking at school improvement planning. So maybe it'll be that I'm tasked to work within a school to improve an aspect of their practice for whatever
Okay.
reason. Curating high quality CPD, completing QA and looking at how QA can then feed into our processes for professional development. So there's never a typical week. It always looks quite different, but the joy of it is I get to be in schools working closely with teachers and leaders,
Yeah.
and
Good.
hopefully making a difference to their practice as well.
Amazing. All right. Well, as with the podcast, if you're new to this, Tracy's selected some elements that we're going to talk through today. A combination of kind of deep-seeking questions, some ignition points from her life, and two of the launch pads that we'll explore. So the first question that Tracy chose and is going to tell us a bit about is, if you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be? So, yeah, tell us about that.
I mean, talk about searching questions,
Pretty
Chris.
big,
This
isn't it?
was
Huh?
like, yeah, this went right to the core, didn't it?
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So for context, proudly working class. So my dad had some periods of redundancy and unemployment during my upbringing, and worked really hard in a printing factory. And my mum worked a series of part-time jobs to fund our education, so
Nice.
paid for us to go to university. And she did that through being a school cleaner, a very proud school cleaner for the time that she was there. And that money single-handedly supported my brother and I to go to university. My sister chose not to go to uni, but so they are incredibly hardworking. There are lots of stories that my mum in particular shares about how difficult it was when they attempted to buy their first house, and it was basically derelict, and the sorts of conditions that we were living in. But what they really instilled, well, what was clear to me as I was growing up, was how incredibly hard both of my parents worked in order
Yeah.
to try and fund a life that they thought was really important for us. And I, of course, am forever grateful for that. But also having this model of industry, they work hard and they were grafters. And even when things got tough, they worked incredibly hard to give us the life that we should have had.
Yeah.
And proudly, they the kind of measure for our family was, do we take them on holiday? And I know that sounds, it
No,
doesn't
no.
sound like the most deprived of stories necessarily, but that was really the key thing for us. Like, can my parents, or for
Yeah.
them at least, can they do that? So would there be anything I change about that aspect? Absolutely not. I feel like I'm a grafter as well, and I feel proud of that, and I feel that I've inherited their grit and determination to create a life that would be fulfilling for me or for other children or whatever.
Yeah.
There is something though that comes with that, and I don't know whether it's a kind of regional thing. I don't know if it's a Black country
Okay.
thing. I'm not sure, or whether it's a kind of setting that you grew up in. But there was always a sense that as I was growing older and I had these kind of new tools in my armory, that I didn't quite feel like I belonged to some of the
Okay.
places that I was able to infiltrate. I'll say infiltrate, it's not really an
Yeah, I
infiltration,
know what you mean.
but so for example, I had the support of a brilliant A-level teacher when I was in year 12 and year 13, who encouraged me to apply to Cambridge University for my
Okay.
undergraduate study. And everything about this whole process was like, come on, Pete,
Yeah.
I'm this kid from Rowley Regis in the Black Country. Absolutely not. I don't belong. And I was shortlisted for interview at Cambridge, which was a complete surprise to me. I didn't ever think I would be. And I remember going, and I was wearing an ill-fitting suit.
Right.
The suit was like what I thought that world would be like.
Okay.
So I thought, I'm going to look corporate, because I just
Yeah.
feel like I need to. I had this like awful briefcase. I don't even know. We got it from charity shop or
I
something. I'm
could
not sure.
picture it now. That
But
sounds,
yeah, it's just like ill-fitting clothes with this briefcase. And I remember going down on the train, and it was like something out of a Dickensian novel. Like when the orphan goes into this world that they don't belong in. And I went in, and the whole experience was just so surreal. And the whole time, I just remember thinking, I don't belong here. This isn't for me. And there were moments that I remember quite vividly. Like there was a boy who was on interview the same day as me, and we were both being interviewed for undergraduate study in English literature. And I remember this boy coming in. He wasn't wearing an ill-fitting suit. I don't think he was wearing a suit at all. He was just had a shirt and some trousers. And he was carrying a huge pile of books, like massive.
Okay.
Like you couldn't even see him from it. He was holding these books up. It's like Keats, Shakespeare, Milton, like the whole lot.
Oh my goodness.
And I thought, oh gosh, I should have done that. I should be the one carrying those books, and the whole experience for me was about, you don't belong here. This isn't a place for people like you. And even then I was successful in getting an undergraduate degree at the University of Birmingham. I felt it then as well. These aren't the same kind of people as me.
Yeah.
And do I belong here? And then that's characterized, that's followed me through my entire career. So I worked for the King Edward's Foundation in Birmingham. They've got a fantastic royal crest as their school logo.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw the advert come up for that, it was for a head of English position. I thought, oh gosh, no, it's got a royal crest. No. I can't. That's not.
Did they have those fancy Latin words?
Oh yeah. It's got Latin words. The whole shebang. The lions doing the thing.
Yeah.
But so there's been this overwhelming feeling, and it's happened lots. And I've managed to shake some of it as I've got older, because I've realised actually, unfortunately, I entered those territories with a bias that I'd created, which is, these people aren't like me.
Yeah.
And it wasn't about superiority at all. It was actually quite the opposite. But what I've grown to learn is that isn't the case at all. And actually, it matters not really. And I've experienced so many amazing things since. Been to the House of Lords. Hopefully soon to go to the Buckingham Palace. So I'm hoping that I can shake some of that.
It's going to slowly, soften over time.
Hopefully, yeah. But also, I think I owe it to other people, because I can't be the only one who feels this way.
Yeah.
To kind of demystify these echelons of whatever experience.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure that my parents could have done anything different.
No.
But I think this. I don't know if it's a strength or if it is actually a weakness. I can't decide. But
well, I don't think you're alone in it. I think, like I say, there's probably the roots of that, what plays out now, doesn't it, in kind of imposter syndrome and all the things that we now know as kind of common terms. But I think on a micro scale, I would imagine lots of people who are new to leadership feel that way when they're in meetings with established leaders. When they want to contribute, but in their minds they're sort of like, wow, I'm not sure I belong here. I'm not sure my voice or my opinion belongs here yet. And that's a shame. And I think you're right. What you said is that as leaders, whether you're established or not, we have a responsibility to create what we would now call probably psychological safety, where people feel like they're valued. Interesting. I definitely see some parallels. As you were talking, I haven't told many people this, but I once applied to go into the Royal Marines. And again, I'm proper working class, and I thought I was going to join just as a recruit, but they said, oh, no, we'd like you to apply to be an officer. And I was like, oh, right, wow. And again, similarly, got on the train down to Lympstone and then got off, and then was suddenly surrounded by people who spoke a lot more eloquently than me and talked about, well, my dad and my granddad and my great-granddad were all Marines and this and this. And I never felt more out of place there as well. Anyway, interesting stuff. Well, let's keep cracking on, because this next bit, again, takes us a bit deeper into your kind of story. And again, for people that are new to the podcast, this idea of an ignition point or an event in someone's life that creates transformation. we're interested in kind of positive transformation. So tell us a bit about what you were like before, what the ignition point was, and then how that changed things.
Yeah, I think I'm going to allude back to the story that I shared with you previously. So
Nice.
this the turning point for me as a teacher and as a leader was that point of joining the school during my NQT year. So I'd had this really awful training year, and it wasn't until a few years later that I became party to a conversation that had taken place behind closed doors that I didn't know about. And the conversation happened between my university lecturer at the time, a brilliant woman called Mary Dunn, and the deputy head of this new school that I was about to join as an NQT. And in that conversation, I later found out that Mary had said to Andy, "Look, we've got this teacher. She's not the finished article. Okay, she needs a lot of work. So if you're willing to put in the work, I think it would really pay off.
Right.
But she needs somewhere that's going to offer her some stability and some support, and to really help her to flourish and to grow." So you can imagine my response, like listening to that, having known that conversation had taken place behind closed doors. You know, people kind of deciding your fate for you, but in the best.
Did you find out much later?
Yeah. I think probably about 5-6 years.
Oh, wow.
But that was a real turning point for me, and actually finding out that conversation had happened, plus then going to the school and doing as I did.
Yeah.
That deputy head took that responsibility so seriously. So, and it was every aspect of my practice. So, and I soon grew in confidence, and of course then grew in ability to be able to perform in the classroom.
Yeah.
What was fascinating about that was that it was his way of laying the foundations for the best possible growth to happen. So he believed in me. I knew I was never going to fail. He told me that. He said, "Tracy, look, you're not going to fail this." It was even like things like when I was delivering my first assembly, he stood at the back with a camera and filmed it. And he said, "You're not going to fail. I won't allow it to happen. It's just not going to happen."
I love that.
So it was never even in the realms of possibility that I would mess something up.
No.
I always felt like I might, because of that was where my confidence levels were at that point. And I think that's actually a good thing. It means that you've got some humility, doesn't it? But he created those conditions that meant I wasn't ever going to fail.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, created then the conditions and the system in order for me to flourish. So I had a double promotion at the end of my NQT year, to a point where I was leading gifted and talented provision across the school and across other schools.
Nice.
And that sort of jump, you might think, oh, I could actually quite frown upon that. But when it's not the single young teacher doing it on her own, but actually there was a whole group of people who were around me making sure that, proposals or things were checked and they were thorough. I had absolute trust in the people that were leading me. That meant that I wouldn't get this wrong. And so after that, where did I got into a position where I could do the same and pay that forward for other people, and pass that baton on to other people. It's that way of being that I take incredibly seriously in my current role. That's why my role is really good for that, because I can create those conditions for other people and support that in an organisation and across a systemic level, which is really exciting.
Oh man, there's some great stuff inside that in there. I mean, the first one about, well, there's a couple, everybody needs a champion. But also, again, as leaders, we can change, we talk about changing kids' lives as teachers, but as leaders, we can change staff's lives by taking, not taking a risk, but, believing in people and, potentially taking a risk. And then the other thing that you were talking about that jumped into my head is this idea that you need a little bit of unconfidence to reach your maximum effectiveness almost. We talk about it a lot again, I told people before that I'm an ex-PE teacher, but we talk a lot about that in sports science, around the fact of there is a healthy level of anxiety, almost like it's a bell curve really, that not enough efficacy or confidence is not great, but then the opposite is also true, that too much confidence is dangerous. And so somewhere in the middle is an interesting spot to be.
I think so. And I think, well, it's testament to the strength of that relationship that Andy's my best friend in the world, so
Really? No, that's
yeah, he's
great.
long retired now. We go on long
I mean, I
walks
thought I was
together.
your best friend in the world.
Yeah, sorry about that. But even so, we share our families with each other. There's a picture of me and my family in his lounge at home. That just
Yeah.
shows the level of
Wow.
relationship that we have. And I think there's always so much more to it, isn't there? And I think
Yeah.
if I can pay that forward and take the baton from Andy and do it at scale, or
That's great.
at least to other colleagues, then I'll have professionally lived quite a successful
Yeah,
and
nice.
satisfying life.
And that's, again, throughout the podcast, we'd like to kind of, call, give out a few call to actions to other leaders that are listening. And I guess that's an interesting challenge for all of us to think, when was the last time we paid it forward? How could we pay it forward tomorrow? So yeah, let's keep going then. So the first launch pad that Tracy's chosen is this idea of a pre-mortem. And so as per usual, I'll talk a little bit about what I was thinking when I created it, and then we'll ask Tracy why it kind of resonates with her. And so here's the tagline. This idea that sometimes we need to kind of start in a dark place in order to find the light. And imagining the failure of a project before you launch it can often save it from reaching that. And so this is pretty common now in business, and a lot of the MPQs reference it. But it's a process that a leadership team, or even a leader, or anybody, I suppose, even a teacher could do this in terms of a lesson, can go through, where it's a systematic process where the first thing is they set the scene. And so make sure everyone's involved, because anybody who's going to be involved in the project may have an insight or some useful thoughts about why it might go wrong. It's important to talk them through what the aim of a pre-mortem is and the process, so they kind of buy into it, they understand it. And then this idea again of, we talked about earlier, the psychological safety, where people feel like they can be their authentic selves and they can tell the truth, and there's no real filtering going on. So set the scene. And then this idea of imagining failure. So creating as much detail as you can about why a project or why a lesson or why whatever might go wrong. Being as creative as you can. Again, zero filtering. And then adding some sort of prioritization to the kind of threat levels, putting the things in order about what, if they did go wrong, how much of a problem would that be? And then, of course, where the learning starts to happen is, okay, well, what might the causes be? What might the contributing factors be? And as you go through the list of those things, you might start to see patterns emerging, or you might think, oh, wow, we have assumed this, or which is fascinating. And then, of course, it's a bit like a kind of maybe a contingency plan, or what you're trying to do is to potentially find solutions that you could put in place to even stop this happening in the first place. Like everything, when we're looking for solutions, you want as strong an evidence base as possible. You want to think about a kind of resourcing, and then start to put a bit of actual meat on the bones around, okay, well, who's going to be responsible, who's going to be kind of involved in each of the sections. And then the last bit, which I think I've adapted because of a love of alliteration, is this idea of, okay, now we've come to the end of the process, let's just almost solidify or kind of clarify our thinking. And so confirming, what have we learned from the process, what causes did we find, and what solutions did we have, and then communicating that with anybody who needs to be kind of involved or consulted. And then the last thing is making sure that once you do launch, that's not the last time you think about it, that you do actively kind of control it as you go through. So yeah, fascinating process. But why did it resonate with you, Tracy?
Oh, for all sorts of reasons. One of the really great piece of advice I was given when I was doing a project at when I was at an assistant head was to always think about what would the voices say. So
Yeah.
Amy Whittle, who was my line manager at the time, brilliant, inspiring leader. sort of said, well, preempt, if you were going to release this, imagine that person in the staff room who's going to be the person who's most against what it is that you're trying to do. And then think about what would the voices say, So I ended up coming up with this kind of bingo card of all of the things that I thought would be the backlash from what we were trying to introduce.
Nice.
Some of those things I would, unashamedly think, come on, this has got to happen for all of these sorts of reasons. And perhaps even originally be quite dismissive of some of those views, which I think is a dangerous position to be in. And it really helped, because then when the thing was released and it was implemented, it really gave me a sense of, if there were any failures in people's thinking or the way that they respond to this, then I'm fully equipped to be able to deal with them, or at least as equipped as I could be. Now, what I really like about this is that this goes further than just the bingo card of what would the voices say. This actually helps us to think about, move beyond the limitations of the voices as an approach. So
nice.
My view of organisational change is that any change that's made at whatever level in an organisation, or any adaptation or whatever, has to move us forward as an organisation as well. So it has to reinforce our culture, or change the culture if it's not a culture that we're ready, always ready for this. And it should, without doubt, move us forward. Now, I think there's often a tension in our profession, because I think that the profession itself favours action over much else. And Dr. Jim, who's my coach and also an advisory member of our national group, he says you have to be careful not to become slave to the moral cause. Right. And the moral cause is strong in our profession, isn't it? There is a children's lives. Tuesday period 1 for these kids is not going to happen again. So we need to make sure that it's the best possible Tuesday period 1 we can get. So there's always this kind of pace that is surrounding the change and the level of change that we need in our schools. Mm-hmm. However, that makes it quite difficult to make meaningful change over a longer sustained period of time, because we don't always make the time or find the time to go through processes like these. Yeah. But I think we owe it to that moral cause to be really sensitive in our thinking about any changes that we're trying to make. And one of those things is to really think carefully about, how could this go wrong? Yeah. I was at a Research Ed talk some years ago with Matthew Evans. I don't know if you know him, but brilliant guy. And he's a head teacher, and he was reflecting on his time as a head teacher. And he said, do you know what? I've come to the realization that being a head and school leadership is about, as soon as we think we've created solved a problem, we're creating the next problem at the same time. So it feels like the job is to just kind of undo problems that we've already created for ourselves. Right. And that resonated with me, because I thought, you know what, you're right. And there is no way of kind of going in with a clean slate and starting all over again. No. But unless we owe it to the thing that we're trying to do, or to the children that we're trying to support, to move beyond some of the assumptions that we might have about change and how it works, and again, we owe it to that time and that sensitive thinking and the sensitivity of thinking to be able to do this really well.
I mean, I think that's the next big soundbite. I think that idea that and you owe it to the problem to give it sufficient time, and it's funny, isn't it? Like you can hear leaders saying, "This is a really important problem," or okay, well, if you're saying it's important, then you need to kind of back that up with, enough thought and stuff like that. Yeah. So, I mean, carry on.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think there's an intellectual challenge that sits behind that, isn't there? Yeah. And you've got to be up for that intellectual challenge. Well, in my view, what gets in the way, and it kind of alludes to what we were talking about earlier, is that I feel that sometimes the status, schools and organisations are hierarchical in their structures, aren't they? And I think sometimes we can be blinded by that hierarchy. Right. And it can just be like, well, I'm in this position, I've got this in my title, therefore this change is going to happen. And sometimes I think it can take away from the intellectual challenge that we're trying to deal with and manage. And I think that can be quite damaging for organisations if we get too deep-seated in our position as an organisation, whereas actually the real power lies in having those conversations and getting rid of that hierarchy, so that you can actually genuinely understand the problem, explore the causes, find the solutions, and work from that.
That is So fascinating. Well, the next thing we're going to go back to now is your second fast friends question. And this one was about what you value most in a friendship. So tell us about
Okay. So I think similar to what we spoke about earlier, you I feel like you should surround yourself with people who serve different purposes for you,
that. Right.
and that and that you proudly serve that purpose for them as well, or a different purpose for them. And one of the things that I really value is the ability of people who I consider friends to be able to just pick up where we left off.
Yeah.
So, there's not this sense of like, oh, we have to do birthdays and, we have to
Yeah.
see each other every month, like the work that's involved behind a friendship, I can't really be bothered with. But,
Yeah.
but what I know is that if somebody was to pick up their phone after, I don't know, years or a few months and say, Tracy, I really need your help or whatever else, I value that in a friendship. So
Yeah.
my partner actually she says I've learned that from you, because she has quite high expectations of not say higher than me, expectations of what she wants from her friends.
Okay.
So, but whereas I'm like, okay, well, if they call, they call, and
Just
then we'll
happy
have
to
a
have
really nice
friends.
time. Yeah, I'm happy to have some mates, and if they want anything, yeah, I'll drop everything and do it for them. So I really value a friendship where that's mutual, so that there isn't the pressure to do all of the stuff, but
Yeah.
actually when we need it, when it's the crunch time, that those people are there, and you can just pick up where you left off.
Yeah. You got a sense of how you create that?
No. Again, this is a conversation we've had at home. It's just always been that way.
Yeah.
It's really
Because it's
odd. So
interesting, like again, to bring it back to leadership, this idea that that the higher up you go in an organization, potentially more distant you get from from people,
yeah.
and that means that you've got less opportunity to invest in those relationships. And certainly in roles like me and you, where we're at trust level, I have to I have to be able to create as many of those relationships that you just described, where I can not see someone for 6 months and then
Yeah.
instantly pick up where we left off. And I wonder whether I'm doing that proactively or not.
I don't know if I do it conscious. I don't know if it
No.
happens consciously, but I mean, it's like I consider you my friend as well, and
Yes. Okay.
we've obviously met sort of quasi professionally
Yeah.
through the network. But I know quite confidently, if I had a problem, I could just call you at any
Yeah.
point, and I don't have to do the, oh, I forgot to send you a birthday card, and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
all of that stuff. Birthday cards are important. I feel like
There
I've
you
really
are.
done them down
Well.
here, but just sort it out between yourselves. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think it's ever a conscious thing, but I know that when that really matters to
Yeah.
me.
Well.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Well, let's get into your second ignition point then. Again, tell us a bit about what you were like before, what happened, and then how it changed you.
Yes, of course. So my second ignition point was a conversation that I had with a colleague of mine in my previous school. So I was a head of department at the time, and obviously that I spoke to you about my GTP year and the NQT year, and at this point I was sort of 7 years in, maybe. Really enjoying the challenge of being a head of department, and it was intellectually quite stimulating for me. It was great. And I thought, well, why wouldn't anybody else want to make this journey? Like my career's grown. I'm doing some really exciting work. I was working for a charity as well at the time, and doing bits for Chartered College, and fingers in lots of pies. Really exciting time. And so in my mind, I couldn't understand why anybody wouldn't think in that way, in the same way. So it came to a conversation that I was having. It was a performance management or PDM conversation. And I was line managing an English teacher in the department who I still consider to be one of the best English teachers that I've worked with. So knowledgeable, funny, a great classroom practitioner, absolutely just brilliant. And on the paperwork, the question came up of, what are your career aspirations? So I sort of
Okay.
said, hoping for, she'll want a promotion or she'll want something else. And Emma, her name is, I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this with you. I said to Emma, right, Emma, what sort of career aspirations? What do you want to achieve in the next 1 to 3
Yeah, yeah,
years, or whatever
standard,
that
yeah.
question was? And she went, Tracy, I'm a mother of two girls, and let's just face it, I'm going to be quite frank with you. As soon as you go on maternity leave and have children, it's career suicide.
Oh no.
And this moment just stopped me completely in my tracks. I obviously wasn't a
Yeah.
mum at that point, and I thought, oh Christ, that's it really did throw me for six, because I thought,
Yeah. God.
well, what worried me firstly was that was the perception that she'd had. And I think there was probably some truth in what she'd said. Unfortunately, that was the conditions that we found ourselves in.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is bonkers. Like, she's the most talented teacher that I've worked
Yeah.
for and with. Even in terms of kind of subject development or how she might want to grow in her role or whatever else, there was a perception that this wasn't going to happen for her because
Yeah.
she'd chosen to have a family. And talk about ignition point. That was a really pivotal moment for me, because quite young at the time, I made a series of judgments that weren't right. But gosh, has that spurred me on to make sure that, well, I'm supporting the MTPT project with Emma Shepherd and the brilliant work that she does there. I'm happy to be an advocate for them on the ground in our trust, and wider than that through Women Ed. But that needs challenging, and again, equally, I've had a friend recently who is on maternity leave, and she was doing a secondment to a senior leadership post successfully. The secondment came to an end while she was on maternity leave, and she'd asked senior leaders at the school, even though I'm on mat leave, can you please contact me if a role comes up that I might be suitable for?
Right.
2 roles have come up, and she knew nothing about them and has missed
Oh
those
no.
opportunities. And so, this is happening everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's something that really does need challenging. So as a mum now of 2 boys, I'm on maternity leave at the moment, and obviously doing this. Isaac, my 4-month-old little boy, came with me to a conference a couple of weeks ago. He visited a school with me yesterday.
Lovely.
And not that it's not merely about kind of flying the flag for women
No,
and
but
who are mothers and whatever else, but that sort of status quo, and it does exist in pockets, unfortunately. And we know that the national data is telling us the same. Women in my age group, age between 30 and 39, biggest group of people to leave teaching, and got the highest attrition rates for them. And that is because at the moment we've got a system where it feels like, or at least it is, where family life and being a successful teacher, leader, support member of staff are seen as being incompatible, and that really does need challenging.
definitely.
So Emma's conversation all those years ago has actually been the thing that I think it all the time. I can't let that happen in our organisation. And I spoke the other day at a conference and said, look, the system's not ready for that yet. It is in some places, but again, it's quite fractured across the system. We've got to be better. And in the absence of a system, it's incumbent upon people like me, people like you, people who've got that influence in their organisations to create the right conditions for these people.
I think you're absolutely right. And a couple of things crossed my mind as you were saying that. One of them about, I wonder how many amazing leaders we've lost or not discovered because they had their own perceptions about limitations to do with that, which is sad. But also the other thing that's on my mind is that if you're a leader listening to this and you think, well, I don't believe that, that's probably not enough.
No.
Because just because you don't believe it doesn't mean that other people know you don't believe it.
Exactly.
So that's interesting that, there has to be some, active kind of, action towards that.
So when you look back, sorry, Chris,
carry on.
I'm on the soapbox now, but when I look back through my career, I've especially recently, and I've been on maternity leave, I've had lots of time to walk and think and stuff. And I've remembered key moments where that must have been quite crippling actually for young mothers or young parents. So I remember a situation where there were comments made about a woman I was working with, because she was one of the first, her car was one of the first to leave the car park, and the perception was, oh, lazy so-and-so. Look at her leaving at 3:45. how dare she? She's not working hard enough. And
Yeah.
actually, I think, gosh, imagine if, firstly, that she was aware that people had that perception of her. How
Yeah.
crippling would that be in your position as a
Oh
teacher,
my goodness.
or with support staff or whatever? But also, as if that was how we thought about this.
Yeah.
Like, looking back now, I'm embarrassed that I was in the room where that thinking was happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, how bonkers is that?
God.
So we've got to be better. That's
That's exactly the phrase I was going to say. Yeah, we can be better.
Emma's taught me that, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, God. All right. Well, we're moving on to the second launchpad, which I think I'm so chuffed that you picked this one, because it's effectively how we met. And so I'm forever grateful to this. And I'll talk a little bit about this. And there's an anecdote which will, which spurred this. This is probably 15 years ago, very young leader at a conference where they were talking about this thing called a PLN. And they just went out into the audience cold call and said, "Oh, Chris, how healthy is your PLN?" And I was thinking, oh God, I don't want to admit that I don't know what it means. So I just said, yeah, it's pretty good. And luckily, they then went on to describe this idea of a kind of personal, or you can exchange that for professional, learning network. And so for them, it was sort of an epiphany for me to sort of think about what am I surrounding myself with? What connections am I making that enable me to learn? And at the time, actually, that was a lie. It wasn't particularly healthy. And so this launchpad starts to unpack that a little bit. And we start with this idea that, your PLN has different components. It can offer a range of different benefits. And you can check the health of it in a couple of ways. So if we just unpack the components for a second, our PLNs are made up of lots of different things, but the broad categories that I came up with was this idea that we may belong to certain organisations, professional bodies, like Chartered College, maybe as a subject association. You can have obviously physical networks, so these will be the teams that you work in or the networks within a school or a trust. You've then got this idea of, they use the word subscriptions, but I guess anything that we have either financially or just kind of time-wise committed to getting regular contact with. So I know I subscribe, so to speak, to lots of Substack newsletters and podcasts and sites that give me information. I don't have to go look for it. I've decided that I'm interested in content regularly from that area, and so I want it to come to me. And then, of course, this idea, and this is where obviously me and Tracy met, this idea of social networks, which hilariously, I think have got a bit of a bad rap. When I talk about social networks to leaders and teachers, they instantly think of the kind of darker side of social networking, or the kind of more less professional, what did I have for dinner, all that sort of stuff. So there's lots of components to them. In terms of benefits, they're fairly straightforward. They certainly provide you with new knowledge, and that's obviously important. But for me, it's about perspective. Like, I connect with and seek out people that have got different perspectives, because kind of, A plus B equals C sort of thing. I'm trying to always refine what I understand and to find people that disagree, but I'm trying to almost QA my understanding all the time. The opportunity thing, I think, is massive. Me and Tracy are benefits of this, that you talk to somebody, they then suggest you do this, and potentially there's a chance to talk at a conference or something like that. And so it just it provides things that would not exist if you hadn't have connected. And then the last one is support, which, if you can join the right social networks and you can manage your connections so that they're in large positive, the amount of support that's available is frightening. And again, we're lucky to be in those positive things. I know that in a heartbeat I could, reach out and ask for some support, and I'd have some really high level expertise coming to help me. And we'll talk a little bit at the end of this about the network that Tracy kind of leads, and I, am on that leadership team. But for me, that's a massive part. And so if you're thinking about kind of how you would respond to that question, how healthy is your PLN? There's a couple of ways of thinking about it. There's something about breadth, so not just geography, like am I connected to people in my area, my region, my country, all those things, but also about how broad is it in terms of domains. Are you only connecting within your subject? Are you only connecting within education? I mean, some of the stuff I've learned recently from business has been frightening and embarrassing, really, because what they're seeing as run of the mill day to day, I'm like, oh my God, this is the best thing I've ever seen. There's something about balance. As I said before, I don't look for people that agree with me, but also I'm not trying to kind of live in conflict. So something about balancing support and challenge. Again, it's the alliterations there. Bountiful. I was trying to think of a word that kind of described actually giving you stuff, so things that are useful, things that change your practice, change your thinking. And then the last one is just this kind of idea of benevolence, that if you've got a healthy PLN, then it is just a nice place to be. It's kind, it's generous, and as I said before, some of the pushback I think on PLNs and social networking might come about because people aren't proactively managing. I mean, I actively unfollow and mute and whatever people that aren't being benevolent. So anyway, there's a bit of a kind of heads up about what PLN is. Why did it resonate with you, Tracy?
Well, I think you've alluded to this as well. So could I speak a little bit about the network, and then that might be helpful, if that's okay? Yeah. So just in, I think it's probably 2 or 3 years ago now, that I started the role at Mercian, and it became really clear to me very quickly that I was the only person that I knew that was doing this role. So, like leading CPD at scale across a trust or across a multi-organisation organisation. And I thought, this is really interesting, because how will I know what it's supposed to look like?
Yeah.
How will I know that I'm doing it well? And how will I know where is it benchmarked somewhere? Has somebody got a kind of idea about what the perfect role of this looks like? I obviously had a job description and a remit and whatever else, but what I've found really beneficial previously is being able to reach out and see what other organisations are doing, so that I can just so I can learn, basically. It's not about kind of dragging and dropping, they do it better, therefore we'll do it their way. It was more about what's happening in other organisations, and how are they tackling some of these problems that I'm facing in my organisation. So you were one of the early members, obviously, of this group. We convened a group of people who had similar roles across multi-academy trusts, and there were only a few of us to start, kind of real stalwarts of the group. And it became quickly apparent to us that more and more trusts were investing in kind of people development, and also their workforce learning and development. And so the group then started to grow, and much at a pace that we weren't really expecting, actually. No. So it started with just a handful of trusts. We're now in a position where we've got up to 250 trusts from across the country who are represented in this group. And the members of the group also serve more than 1 million children across the country, which I think is quite cool, actually. We were both saying at the start of this, weren't we, Chris, that we would love to be millionaires. We weren't quite expecting this level of this level of that.
Kids, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, that's true. But what that really shows is that there was an appetite for learning and for kind of navigating this territory that feels a little bit unknown at times, because there were just so many different models and so many ways of doing it. And so the network has grown and gone from strength to strength. And really what's at the heart of this is, how do we create a culture of thinking within our role? And that's something that I'm really proud of, that I think we do incredibly well at the network. We've invited all sorts of people to the network who have very, very kindly given their time and their expertise for free, in order for people to learn and to grow in their roles, and to to have real balance in their thinking as well. And that idea of support and challenge, in terms of the health of that PLN is so crucial. Because we are at risk of groupthink, I think, sometimes, and again, coming back to what we said earlier, when leaders are under pressure to make a decision quickly, we can just look at the surface of what deems or what seems to be successful and think, that'll just work in my organisation because such and such does it, and it must be good because everyone's talking about it. When actually what we're trying to do here is to grow the capacity of those leaders to make really good, high quality decisions for their organisations, which is again something that we feel incredibly proud of. And what's one of the benefits of that learning environment is that selfishly I set it up so I could learn, and I'm pretty sure I learn more about all of this than the people who turn up. And it's been a really fulfilling thing to be able to do. What we are finding now is that we are able to capture, and we talk about harnessing expertise all the time, don't we, Chris? Is that how do we now as a group, and this is, again, it's completely free. We feel really passionately about the fact that it should be free. We think that taxpayers' money should stay in schools and to harness the expertise that we've got there and to fund the right things. We know that it is having an impact on those colleagues who are turning up. We get emails from people saying, like, I wouldn't have been able to do my role without this group, and which is really exciting. So we're in a position now where we're trying to create systems that enable that to happen in an even more successful way. So, instead of just having kind of one-off talks from people that inspires lots of thinking and gets lots of ideas together, how do we know that people have got the opportunity to really grapple with big problems and persistent problems in their organisation? And where are they given the time and the space to be able to really, again, grapple with that as an issue? So we've set up 3 communities of practice. You obviously run one of those. I run another, and Sam Gibbs runs the third one, where people have the time, a dedicated time and space to be professionally generous and humble, and to say, I don't know the answer to this, but here's what I'm thinking, and here's how my thinking has grown as a result of this. And I think it's an incredibly powerful tool. And I'm really pleased that those colleagues are then going back into their organisations, and this is resulting in organisational change. And organisational challenge as well. So people aren't just blindly accepting the status quo, but actually saying, no, is there another way? And have we really thought this through? And again, enabling them to do the pre-mortems that we spoke about, and having the confidence to be able to do that as well. So what's nice is that there's a kind of army behind everybody who's doing this job in those 200 plus trusts. There's an army of people and an army of expertise that's supporting them. And
it's great. I mean, you've used this phrase, kind of pay it forward, a few times. And I think that's super interesting, isn't it? Because I think people that come to the network or go to any other networks, once they feel the benefit of it, they feel like they then can pay it forward, and they should pay it forward. And that is just a kind of amplifying, cyclical kind of relationship that can only be useful for the whole kind of sector. I mean, in terms of calls to action for people that are listening to this, I guess the first one, of course, is to have a think about how healthy your PLN is at the moment, but also about how professionally generous you're being. Fascinating. Well, we have come to the end of the podcast, and we've got one more Fast Friends question, which potentially could be the most revealing, I suppose. And Tracy's chosen, when did you last cry in front of another person?
Gosh, Chris, I mean, we could have left on something slightly more positive. We should have, shouldn't we?
Well,
I didn't realise this one was coming last, but okay. So, unfortunately, the last couple of weeks have been full of tears for both myself and my family. We experienced quite a devastating bereavement in our family. My niece passed away just hours before she was due to be born. And obviously being a mother of a 4-month-old baby myself, and knowing all of what would have been experienced and the joy that should have been experienced in those moments for my brother and his wife, this has been an incredibly challenging time. So there's been lots of tears. I couldn't tell you the last time I cried in front of other people, because it just feels like we've been crying. As grief is, it's the norm, isn't it? We just feel like we've been very, very upset a lot of the time. I will say it's probably worth a shout out. I don't know if he's going to listen to this, but my brother and his wife, and their strength during this time has just been one of the most formidable things that I've ever experienced. And what I have taken from that is a kind of permission to grieve.
Yeah.
They haven't been afraid or guarded in their grief. It's interesting that he lives in another country. He lives in Germany with his wife. And he said to me on the phone, he said, "It's interesting, Tracy, that I feel like I can grieve more openly here."
Right.
And he has done, and I found that really quite inspiring,
That
because
is, yeah.
what it's made me realise is that there are certain things that, I mean, like, it doesn't get much more tragic than what's happened. I can't really put it into words, but it does show you actually that at its time, at our time of being our most human, at grief, during grief, is that's something that we shouldn't be afraid of. And I feel that we are. I think that's been the thing before, was to kind of stifle your cries a little bit, or just not or even not share with people what's happened, and to talk openly about this tragedy. And I've learned huge amounts, actually, and I've learned huge amounts about the strength of people, particularly my family, at a time where you would expect them to be absolutely sort of on the floor. So a really difficult time for everybody, and a time for real reflection. I've been reading a book about grief by somebody called Carrie Lloyd. She runs a podcast called Griefcast.
Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it? At moments like this, you look for the answer, and I don't know if this is another personal learning kind of network, but I really thought, I can't be alone in this grief. I want to understand it better. And that podcast has been incredible. And she'd sort of mentioned in there that your grief doesn't really go away, and that we should have the permission to grieve properly, and that it's not something that you need to be afraid of. And I again took some, it's not even confidence, it took something from that meant positive. That you have permission to grieve.
That's such a nice, again, a horrible phrase to have, but again, another sort of takeaway for people, this creating environments where people feel like they've got permission, in a really sad way. We wish it's not so, but I would imagine that grief is something that probably connects us all at some point during our lives.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's about people's responses as well. Like, because what can you say at a time like this? I mean, we'd said right at the start, there is no consolation. That you can't be, and there isn't with any grief. And I'm fiercely against it, actually. They had a good innings and they had a good life, and whatever else. Actually, grief really hurts, and that's the bottom line. Like, you've lost somebody that should have been here, and that you almost deserved to have in your life. And it is interesting. Actually, it's made me realise that there will be colleagues in our organisations who are going through something like this, and grief full stop. Actually, not necessarily in the most tragic
probably.
Exactly, and I think again it just is another reminder about how you translate your own personal experiences into your professional life to make things better for other people. And again, it's the theme of the day, isn't it? It's like, how do you pay that forward? We've experienced something deeply, deeply tragic and heartbreaking. But again, I feel that I might be differently placed if I come across somebody in our organisation who's experienced grief, and that has to be her legacy. Actually, I think I owe it to her for
that's nice.
teaching me that as her aunt, I guess.
Well, I mean, when we before we came on, and I knew that you'd picked this one, I was almost prepared to talk about when the last time I cried, because it's always good to be vulnerable. And mine's a little, I guess it's positive, I suppose, in that I interviewed a skit trainee, so initial teacher training, the day before yesterday, and this girl, reasonably young, but come on and just exuded like passion for teaching and wanting to make a difference. And the whole way through the interview, I couldn't stop smiling, and I just thought, God, you're going to be so great. You're going to be so great, and all this sort of stuff. And towards the end, I was interviewing with the director of our skit, and at the end, the obvious question is, if you've got any other applications in and this sort of thing. And this girl, and I think it's going to trigger me off again, actually. So this girl said, "Oh, no. You're the only provider that I want to work with because of your commitment to kind of equity and tackling disadvantage." So already I was like, oh. And then my director of skit just said, "Well, I'm gonna change things up, and because I'm the boss, I'm gonna tell you right now, we're gonna offer you a place." And then this young lady just started crying because she was so chuffed. And then, of course, me and the other skit director started crying. And then I was having to look at my second screen to try and be a little bit composed. But it just dawned on me what an amazing job we've all got, and how much it means to people, and people that are in positions like me and yourself that can hold people's careers in our hands, or we can lift them up like you talked about right at the beginning. What an amazing thing to be able to do. And if you can fill your days with that, I think you're going to be pretty chuffed at the end of all this. Okay, well, I have no idea how long we've been talking for, but it's been an absolute joy. So yeah, the last thing to say really is just a massive thank you to Tracy. In terms of connecting with her, LinkedIn is her kind of preferred network. She's already talked a bit about the Trustwide CPD network. We would love, if you're in a role across a trust, to contact us and get involved in that. Again, if you're interested in the Launchpad stuff and you think this has been useful, then check out the podcast, connect with me on the socials, and you can use the QR code to create the book. So apart from that, thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the next one.
So much, Chris.